Yesterday, I introduced to you Donald Heinz, the author of this book, Christmas Festival of Incarnation. It's a terrific read, and it really is a remarkable overview, and I would say in many ways a history of this very, very special day of the year that literally hundreds of millions of people celebrate. And it's just a delight to have you back.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the program once again. We covered a lot yesterday, but we have much more to cover. I'd like to begin by talking about the genealogy in Matthew. You know, whenever we get to a genealogy, our eyes glaze over, you know, and so begat so-and-so, and so begat so-and-so, and, you know, you read all. Why is the genealogy in Matthew so important to the Christmas story?
I just happened to see on the airplane coming from Washington, there's a new book on the King James Version of the Bible, and its title is Begat, right, because it's such an old English word. Generally, so we think Matthew was writing around maybe 80 AD, so 50 years after the death and resurrection of Christ, and that he's writing perhaps predominantly for a Jewish, a community of Jewish Christians. And Matthew seems to want to portray Christ as recapitulating the history of Israel. So these new Jewish Christians who have embraced Jesus as the Messiah want to be persuaded that all the things that God was doing in the Hebrew Scriptures, that Christians call the Old Testament, are now being taken up and revalidated, redone, so that Jesus is shown to be the heir of that whole Old Testament tradition, who now again brings it to life, and God is doing a new thing.
And it was important to show in Jesus' bloodline, if you will, an unbroken line back to King David.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus is, as we see later in the Gospels, Jesus is interested in claiming that title, Son of David. And of course, this also establishes that Jesus wasn't some phantom figure who sort of floated above the ground, as some early Christian heresies thought, not so-called Gnosticism. No, this was a person with human bloodlines. God had literally come in human form and taken human flesh.
And it's interesting in that genealogy that there are some women of ill repute,
yes,
who are a part of Jesus' lineage, and even a non-Jew by the name of Ruth.
Luther loved the fact that these less reputable people show up in the heritage of Jesus, and Luther says that's so we'll be sure to know that he's also come for people like us.
Yeah. What about Joseph? Joseph is kind of eclipsed in the Christmas story, and I look at this guy, and I'm thinking, what a remarkable, you know, we talked yesterday about Mary giving her consent. In many ways, Joseph gave his consent. In Jewish tradition, I mean, when you were betrothed to someone, usually as a child, you were betrothed to another child. It was like you were married, and in order to break that betrothal, it was like a divorce. It was a very, very serious thing, and of course, sexual purity was vital. He had every reason to say, this isn't going to work. You're pregnant, and there's only one way to become pregnant. What about him?
Yeah, my book does its best to rehabilitate Joseph. In the Gospel of Matthew, Joseph, the so-called just Israelite, is actually the hero of the story. And he finds himself catapulted into a drama in which he keeps wondering, why is this happening to me, and what is going on? And angels keep intervening 3 times in Matthew, also to the wise men, sort of orchestrating the whole story set on a world stage. But because in the Catholic tradition, the Roman Catholic tradition, it was so important to establish the perpetual virginity of Mary, not necessarily a point made in the New Testament, but very important to the subsequent Catholic tradition, Joseph somehow has to be pulled out of the picture if Mary is going to be a perpetual virgin. So in Christian art, from the medieval period through the Renaissance, sometimes he's not there at all in the picture. Sometimes he's asleep. He's kind of a non-entity. And Protestants too. I mean, what Protestant church ever calls itself St. Joseph? Hardly ever. And so I try to think, what can we do about Joseph? And so I make the point, I think we, especially when we have men's movements in the Western world these days, that following Christian feminism, now how about men too? What do they need to do? And promise keepers and all that. I suggest that maybe we could rehabilitate Joseph as the patron saint of male commitment.
Yeah, there you go.
He hangs in there.
Yeah.
He had every reason to walk. He didn't. He stayed.
And he really became a defender for Mary and for the baby.
Yeah.
And if it weren't for his openness to the voice of the Lord and his willingness to do some tough things, like just the journey from Nazareth down to Bethlehem was tough enough with a 9-month pregnant woman, but then to go to Egypt, I mean,
Jesus becomes the first refugee.
Yeah, he becomes the first refugee. I mean, I lived over there for 7 years. I know what rugged terrain that is and how difficult that must have been to walk.
Yeah.
He's a remarkable character. What about Elizabeth and Zechariah and their son John? They're a part of this Christmas story too.
Yeah, and they're unique to Luke's telling. They don't show up in Matthew. And I think Luke wants a kind of chorus of slightly peripheral figures, almost like in Handel's oratorios, you have the main stuff, and then you have all these ancillary people sort of joining in and singing arias and filling out the story. And of course, John the Baptist turns out to be the forerunner, the preparer of the way, the one who points to Jesus. So Elizabeth is the pious Jew, maybe a little bit like Hannah in the Old Testament, who wishes she could have a baby but doesn't ever. And then all of a sudden she does. So I think, and then Luke loves to show how women, in the first century world, women were never really important and acknowledged. So now Luke's got 2 women, Mary, the Virgin Mary, and Elizabeth, and they play starring roles.
Yeah.